The following podcast is an Embassy Row production.
Drum roll, please. God, I'm so bad at drum rolling. Welcome to the Shaken and Stirred Show. I'm Nigel Barker in New York, and I'm here with my co-host Tom Astor in Oxford. How are you, Tom?
I'm well, Nigel. Thanks. Yeah, really well. It's a June evening. I just got in, and I'm cold. It's one of those June damp. You know, I've been at a cricket match, watching my son play cricket for the last couple of hours, and it's just, you know, a little bit of drizzle, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Typical English kind of, you know, chilled weather. But other than that, everything's great. You know,
people over here really do not understand cricket. I think of all the English sports that there are, cricket has to be the number one misunderstood sport in the US. They just have no idea.
Probably the most civilized game in the world. I mean, I can't think of it's maybe snooker's quite civilized, but I don't know. It's played in a dark room, so maybe not.
Playing with your balls in a dark room, Tom, is rarely civilized. But cricket, on the other hand, where you have a hot red ball, very fast moving, but it's a very slow game. No, it takes forever.
It can do. I was just saying to Anne-Marie when we produced that you get a test match, it can take 4 days. One game can take 4 days. Anne-Marie asked me...
Anne-Marie, our producer, he's talking about, everyone out there.
Then asked me rather sweetly whether that meant that, did they play through the night? Did they actually go to sleep?
Yes, as I said, it is probably the most misunderstood game in America. People literally have no idea what people are doing. They assume people are all getting drunk, drinking Pimm's, and then at the same time having cucumber sandwiches as some sort of refreshment, which in itself sounds ridiculous.
I've just been doing, exactly.
No, exactly. So there you go. But guys, you know, before we move on, we've got a great guest today. What are you drinking, Tommy boy?
Oh, well, because I got a little chill, I came in and I made myself a bull shot. I basically, beef consomme, good old Baxter's soup. You know, there it is. Look at that.
Oh, God, that's disgusting.
It's so good. You know, boiled beef bones, warmed up with a splash of vodka. And tonight I'm putting this added thing, this bull shot sauce, which is rather amazing. It's like chilies, hint of smoke, seriously hot, spicy sauce. So it's a bit like Worcestershire sauce, or however you Americans call it. It's a bit like Worcester sauce, but it's with a kick. Bit of that in it, and you know what? The chill's gone. The drink's warm. I mean, basically, you are able to turn just about anything into a cocktail, even if it's sort of beef consomme soup is somehow turned into a cocktail with a shot of vodka. So there you go, people. Next time you get cold and you want to have your cocktail and your dinner, simply drop the vodka in your soup, and you're good to go. 2 in 1.
My goodness. Well, I've gone the opposite way because it's a lovely, balmy evening here in New York, and the sun is shining. It's over 70 degrees right now. So I decided to make myself, because, you know, watermelons are in season, a watermelon margarita, no less. Oh. And in fact, I took it a step further. I blended a whole bunch of, like 2 cups worth of watermelon and added sugar and made my own watermelon simple syrup. And use that inside this margarita, which has tequila. I actually used the Los Sundays Blanco tequila, and I used about 1.5 limes because they're a little small these days for some reason, but absolutely delicious and juicy. Half an ounce of the simple syrup, and then I poured in some of the actual, watermelon itself into the drink and kind of just shook it up. And here it is, no salt. And a little watermelon cube on the side, and it's delicious. Cheers, very refreshing.
Chin chin.
Chin chin, my friend. Boom. Booze news. Not the 9 o'clock news, but booze news.
Yeah, I've got one little snippet.
I've got something too.
The richer you are, the more likely you are to drink to excess in this country. And generally, late teens and 20s are drinking much less than they did 20 years ago, and the 55s and over are drinking much more. That's my news.
And once again, you can see how entertaining Tom would be at the news. Basically, not a newscaster is.
No, well, do you know something? The thing is, I don't understand it because I look at this booze, I look at the facts like this, and they're saying things like, 18% of people over the age of 55 confessed drinking more than X amount of units per week. And then I can't work out what a unit is. And I look at a unit and I'm like, so basically what they're saying is they drink, 18% of adults in a bad way admit to drinking sort of half a bottle of wine a night, at least 5 days a week. And I'm looking at it going, Jesus Christ. I mean, that doesn't strike me as being, I don't know, maybe I've just come from a big drinking family, but that does not strike me as being very much.
Well, it's all relative, Tommy boy. And I have a little bit of booze news myself. I love the fact that it's just all boils down to how much you can drink. The world's oldest single malt whiskey, Scotch, aged 80 years, is set for release. Now, joining the chorus of rare whiskey satisfying top shelf palates, legendary bottler Gordon and MacPhail announced an upcoming release of what will be the longest aged single malt Scotch on the market. It's an 80-year-old, as I mentioned, produced by the Glenlivet Distillery. And it's kind of an interesting story because in February 3rd, 1940, George Urquhart, I think that's how you pronounce it, Urquhart, and his dad. Urquhart. Is it Urquhart? There you go. On February 3rd, 1940, George Urquhart and his dad John sealed cask 340 with the intention that it would be enjoyed by future generations. So he's apparently known as the father of single malt Scotch. You probably knew that, Tom. I'm not a big Scotch drinker. And he's well known for saying the future is shaped by what you do today. Obviously, putting whiskey in casks and then drinking it 10 years, 20 years later, whatever you do at that moment, will be enjoyed for later on. Now, this decanter, I guess he's producing out of this 250 bespoke decanters of this 80-year-old whiskey, which is being designed by some great designer, apparently. And decanter number 1 will be auctioned off by Sotheby's at the end of the summer in September of this year. Now, they did something similar to this in 2016 with a 75-year-old Scotch, and the bottles went for approximately $28,000 each. So, if you'd like a basically $30,000 bottle of whiskey, just start saving, because in September one can be yours, 80 years old. How about that? Yeah. Octogenarian.
No, that's all well and good, but there's a long tradition in these distilleries in Scotland of the makers like to add their little mark to these barrels occasionally. And I'm wondering if the father of the Scotch whiskey, the modern Scotch whiskey, added his little mark. You know what I'm getting at?
I'm hoping you're not talking about the little doggy who was sniffing the actual casks again. Might have done a little leak on the side, if that's what you're talking about.
28,000 quid for that? Whatever.
Yeah, well, no wonder. I'm not a Scotch drinker. Anyway, we have a wonderful guest on today.
By the way, sorry, let's just get that completely straight. There's absolutely no basis in what I just said at all. I just thought it'd be amusing. Because I swear...
Tommy, there's no basis on anything that you ever say. I mean, it's all codswallop, and we know it.
I love the idea of Urquhart pissing in the barrel going, oh, something bloody good by the time they get out to drink it. This in 86 years. They're going to love it. Some bastard's probably going to pee through the bloody nose. I wouldn't have a clue what he's drinking. Anyway, obviously that's not the case, but, just throw that out there.
And on that note, our guest today is an old friend of mine. Now, we first met at New York Fashion Week. I don't know how long ago. It's probably about 15 odd years ago. And I got to say, I was blown away by his brilliant collection. I literally remember sitting there in the front row, as I was lucky enough to be sitting in the front row, and just looking at the pieces come down the runway and thinking to myself, ooh, I'd wear that. Ooh, that's really cool. I need to shoot that. And then I finally thought, well, who is this guy? And I sought him out. Now, he basically is known for a lot of different things. This is a man who's worn many different hats while I've known him. Not just is he an accomplished and acclaimed and award-winning fashion designer, and he has dressed the likes of the Sex Pistols, he's collaborated with stars like David Bowie, but he's in fact a rock and roller himself. He's the lead singer of a band called Slinky Vagabond with an all-star ensemble and has a new album out called King Boy Vandals. Please welcome Keenan Dufty. Keenan, mate, how are you?
With that introduction, I think I'll just go home now. Slinky Vagabond, not to be confused with Stinky Vagabond.
Which was your previous band?
Which was the previous band, yeah. Which was my nickname at school.
There you go.
So when you were sat in that front row, somebody came backstage and said, Nigel Barker's in the front row. And I was like, oh, you got to get him, bring him back after the show. And then, of course, we didn't connect there, but we connected at another point, not so soon after, I think. But yeah, thank you for enjoying the show. I think it's like Brits in New York got what I was trying to do, which was very much a British street fashion thing. And that really helped, it really helped to sort of get the word out, I think, because especially like 20 years ago, more than 20 when I started in New York, people didn't really get that British translation. They sort of didn't really necessarily understand the Brit punk thing. Britpop didn't really happen in America, so there was a bit of a disconnect. So, it really helped having folks like you kind of understood and could translate it to our American cousins.
Well, I want to get into all of that, but before we get there, what are you drinking?
I am drinking. It's actually a berry cocktail.
Delicious.
And it's in a glass that my wife gave to me, which says anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance on the side. And they're the different levels that you get to as you get through the cocktail, except for that probably won't happen with me because this is a mocktail, actually.
Sorry, if that was alcoholic, the other way up. So anger obviously starts at the bottom, right?
It's actually it's defiance, anger, bargaining, depression, and then finally acceptance when you get to the bottom that you are actually in trouble.
Or passed out.
Or gone under the table.
Well, cheers, my friend. It's wonderful to have you on. We appreciate you.
Great to join you. I'd love this show. It's great. You guys are doing a fantastic job. And it's you have some great guests, some great conversations. It's wonderful.
Oh, well, we're about to get into it with you now, Keenan, so beware.
Wait for it, yeah.
We want to know it all. We're going to pull it all back. But, so you obviously, you kind of jumped in there and led on about the sort of Brit pop and, the sort of punk rock kind of feel and vibe. And, obviously, with someone like yourself, you're a musician and you have we mentioned you have a new album out and you're part of this great band as the lead singer. But with you, was it the music or the fashion that came first?
It was totally music. I kind of grew up watching Top of the Pops and, seeing those great bands. And I'm a huge Bowie fan, but actually when I was a kid, I didn't really get Bowie. I kind of liked bands like The Sweet and, Slade, the more kind of hit single bands that were on Top of the Pops. And then even things like Libelle, Lady Marmalade, they were actually very glam. They were very kind of glam presentation. And that really attracted me. So it was the clothes of those bands that I was really into. I loved the music, but the clothes really excited me. And I'd see people like Brian Ferry, and he looked like he was, from another planet. I mean, a lot of people say this about that era of music, and maybe you were younger than me, so maybe, you didn't experience it at that time. But it was wanting to be dressed like those artists. And I really loved the style and, just the glamour of it all. It was fantastic. And it was very out of reach until punk. And then punk sort of allowed you to slash the side of your, flared pants and duct tape them together and have suddenly skinny pants and a ripped t-shirt and cut your own hair and have spiky hair and go out, and express yourself, which is kind of dangerous growing up in Doncaster because that led to one or two long, speedy exits from venues, let's say. But yeah, it was very much music and fashion. I wasn't really aware of fashion. I mean, I remember going to interview at St. Martin's and pronouncing every designer's name wrong, like Versace, Issey Miyake. It was like, I didn't know. I basically bought Vogue in the train station in Doncaster, got on the train, read it cover to cover, and then went into the interview and tried to sort of regurgitate what I read. And it worked. I got in. So
how did you get it?
Sorry, just before you came on, we were doing a thing called Booze News, and Nigel was doing. Nigel tends to do that on pretty much every podcast. He'll pick something like a French word or something, and because he left school when he was 12 to become a model, he just doesn't get the basics of the pronunciation. So he was trying to pronounce Urquhart, which is a pretty straightforward name, I would have said. But you should, hopefully they won't edit it out. When you listen to this podcast, they'll keep it in because it's too good. It's exactly what you've just been saying,
You told me, edit almost everything that you say out. Actually, you'll notice.
Probably, otherwise we'll be sued. I just imagine that. Anyway.
Well, it's names like St. John and Chumley, and half of the Americans.
My mother's maiden name is St. John.
St. John, yeah, there you go. And you sort of, I mean, it was famously mispronounced by Rowan Atkinson in Notting Hill. As the vicar in Notting Hill, and he can't get anyone's names right. But I hear that all the time. Still, living in New York, I hear all of these Leicester Square and those kind of pronunciations, which kind of tickle me.
Worcester sauce, exactly.
Worcester sauce is the classic, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it was really, the kind of music thing that I really loved. And, I'm sitting, it looks like I'm sitting in Strand Bookstore, but I'm sitting behind a bookshelf here that goes way up. And, it's you have to go to the top. And in one section, there are fashion books, and the rest of it is music, comics, James Bond novels. My wife has a little section down the bottom here as well, which she keeps ribbing me about.
What's in that section?
Her section contains books of intellectual nature, like books that you actually read. I just have books that I look at the pictures, like Nigel's book, for example.
Like Nigel's. I was going to say that earlier.
Perfect. Models of influence, great pictures,
And that's what all I'm about, picture books, basically. And if they're scratch and sniff, all the better. But, so many top designers are inspired by music. I mean, there's no doubt that if you look at fashion throughout the ages, the music industry is, almost is the heartbeat of the street, right? It sort of acts as, what's happening, the zeitgeist of the time is being fed, through the musicians, through the bands, through whatever the music is at that moment. And so you sort of, whatever that vibe is, it brings it to life through music. And that's the very first translation, isn't it?
Totally, yeah, totally. And it's what, when I started in college, I was making clothes for myself and my friends, and they were really like, performance based. They weren't anything you would really wear in a day-to-day, setting. I mean, I actually brought a prop to show you here. So this is me in the orange-haired Ziggy Stardust from Doncaster outfit. With my good friend Dylan Jones here, who's much more somber in a Jean-Paul Gaultier get-up. But, this in college, I was making stuff like that. I was in IB magazine in like 1985, and I was making stuff like that to for my friends to wear, for myself to wear, because I was making music back then as well, and sort of got a lucky break, found a manager actually when I was really young, who was kind of pushing me and getting me to make records and record for EMI and stuff like that. So the clothes were really for performance. I didn't connect that you might want to wear them in the street. So it was just full throttle. It was kind of as provocative and as outrageous as you could be. And I didn't think about making stuff in a commercial setting at all, which I think is a great thing about going to school, that, a fashion school, you can express all that and actually have a chance to present it to the world. Because when you get into society and you have boring stuff like mortgages and car payments and all that kind of stuff to take care of, you have to think a bit more commercially, so maybe it gets tamed a little bit, and it's a great time to express it in college. It's really
it's so funny. You and I have so much in common in so many unusual ways. However, we're also completely different, right? So it's like you mentioned those bands, you said, well, I might not have been as inspired by them, but actually, on the contrary, my favorite bands, one of my very first albums I ever bought on vinyl was David Bowie, right? So,
right.
And Mark Bolan and T-Rex, I had a huge poster on my wall, with him playing his guitar, and that was one of my favorite albums ever, even to this day, still is.
Yeah.
So, and I've always had as well seen glam rock and that kind of just over the top expressiveness that you would see in rock and roll at that time as being something just so outrageous, so crazy. I mean, Led Zeppelin obviously as well, with the big hair, the tight jeans, and all the rest of it had a big part of that. They weren't as camp perhaps, or as out there from a fashion perspective as people like Bowie. But you also mentioned these bands like Slade, who were the sort of commercial, as you said, they're sort of one-hit wonders type of band. But I mean, as soon as you said Slade, it put a smile on my face, though. It was kind of happy music. I mean, it was sort of drunken, happy, kind of crazy, you could sort of scream it at a pub kind of music.
Totally, yeah. I mean, Slade, when I listen back to them, there's a double track echo. So Noddy Holder's got that kind of John Lennon thing going on. And the piano, descending chords and everything. It's very much like the Beatles, like a kind of Lennon era Beatles, but with that stompy terrace thing, the football thing going on. So kids would sing it on a Saturday afternoon at a football match. I never went to football because I lived in Doncaster and they had the worst team in the world when I was a kid. So going to football wasn't really a thing for me so much. But yeah, I mean, I think it's like a lot of us from a particular era. You mentioned things we have in common. You and I are born a day apart. And Chrissy and my wife are born a day apart, not the same year, the same dates. So there's a lot we have in common, not just the fashion stuff and the music, but like, kind of mystical stuff, like when you're born and all that kind of thing.
No, it's unusual. It's funny too, because I studied fashion design, pattern cutting and tailoring at my high school, Bryanston, that Tom and I went to school at. And our boarding school. And that was actually a big interest of mine as well. And it's something that I did. But unlike you, who was doing the sort of punk rock and kind of super cool stuff, I was doing stuff that was actually quite commercial, funnily enough. And I actually ended up creating a hat that I sold on the high street in a store called General Trading Company when I was 18 through my brother. Right. So, and so my whole approach was far more commercial than yours was at that young age. And what I was looking to try and complete. So it's funny. And also too, going back to Sex Pistols, I believe Malcolm McLaren, wasn't he the manager of the Sex Pistols?
Yeah.
He was also my mother's manager when my mother was a singer.
Right.
So there's another, just a degree of separation where you dressed the Sex Pistols and my mum, it was her manager. So it's funny how the world is and how often there's just a little bit of separation between people and who they know and what they know. But again, I've always personally, music just plays a massive part. I mean, Tom's a big musician and loves to have musicians at his house and entertain musicians, and performed in bands, and in fact helped write and perform the music for this show that when we first launched it. And it's a big part of everything. Why do you think? I mean, what's your take on the sort of how music is the storytelling of the time, like how it becomes that? How does it evolve? What do you think it really creates that moment that sort of jump from what's happening right here to the sounds that we hear and the fact that that's what historically has been the case?
I think it does exactly that. It reflects in a broader sense what's happening in youth culture, and whether it's beats, whether it's chord sequences, whether it's riffs, whatever it is, whether it's vocal melody line, whether it's a style of music, it encapsulates that time. Nothing sort of has done that better than movements like acid house, for example, which rave culture was a kind of different interpretation in the US, but in the UK, that sort of codified and brought together all of these kids from very different places. So you got the football hooligans raving with kids from art school, raving with people from bands that would go to these sort of M25 circular weekend illegal raves, and it was fueled actually as well by ecstasy. There was the explosion of ecstasy. So when you look at music through the ages, there's a parallel of drug culture. There's a parallel of what people wear, how they express themselves through fashion, although they don't necessarily consider it fashion because they don't want to be part of the mainstream per se. And then the music soundtracks it. And I think, you mentioned Led Zeppelin. It's a great example. They never let their music be used in commercials, and they didn't really release singles. And yet, when I was a kid, I grew up with that Whole Lot of Love instrumental on top of the pops. For years, I didn't know it was Led Zeppelin. There was a total disconnect to me. But that was where the sort of it touches the contemporary nerve, is through music connecting in a broader sense. And I think that's what it's really made for. People say today, music isn't what it used to be because the industry's been destroyed by streaming and all of that. But if you talk to a 18, 19-year-old, 20-year-old today, they're just as into music, and they're looking for what's happening in the underground. They're looking for what's happening in the commercial space, just as much as kids were in the 70s and 80s and 90s, like when hip hop exploded, for example.
The thing is, as you said, the kind of ecstasy rave culture and everything. My problem, I was in the car earlier on with my 18-year-old son, and I think, it's high time we change the current drug of fucking choice, because it strikes me that they're all smoking too much of this super fucking strength weed, and the music is I mean, I'm a musician, but drill music, I don't know, you know what? It's just like my kids sitting in the car listening to this stuff. I'm just like, they all literally sound like it was got up, had a massive joint, and she could barely be bothered to get the words out, let alone kind of like making it. I mean, it's just kind of like, and I sit there thinking, am I turning into my parents? Is this what old people do? But I'm like thinking, no. Literally, let's get some new drugs on the market and try and change the thing. I don't know. That's anyway. Sorry, I just had this. What you were saying, I had this morning. It's the very same thing. It's like,
it's a very good observation, Tom. Actually, I think it's the perfect observation. And when I'm teaching, I teach fashion students, and I always give that analogy of because they want to know. They want to know about the history of the waves of fashion in the late 20th century, early 21st. And I always say, you look at what's happening in drug culture at that time, because it often fuels creativity. The Halston documentary that was on Netflix recently, you see how Studio 54 and Halston, a lot of the music artists, a lot of the designers and models at that time were fueled by cocaine, and I'm not, saying everybody go and do cocaine or everybody go and do ecstasy. That's not my point. But it does actually influence creatives in a way. And I think the other good point you make as well is the disconnect. I do think I'm too old, because a lot of music that exists today, like there's this band called Working Men's Club. I really, really like them. They're like a dance music act. But when I listen to them, I can hear all the influences. And so it is new, but it's not new to me, because I kind of go, oh, it's a bit of this and a bit of that. And I didn't really notice that with a band like Roxy Music, because I didn't know the influences. I didn't really know R&B. I didn't really know blues. I didn't really know Stockhausen or, any of those things that came together. But as you get older, you get more informed. And I think that does tend to remove you a little bit from actually being able to enjoy contemporary stuff, because you can kind of see behind the curtain a little bit.
Clearly. No, that's actually a very interesting point, because likewise, I'm listening to music with my daughter, and I'm thinking, oh, I recognize that little lyric, that little sound, that little noise, that little piece. Some producers picked it from here, pulled it from there. And I even thought, sort of had brainwaves. I'm like, oh my goodness, what about this song? They should pull. And my daughter's like, yeah, I've actually never heard that sound before. And I'm like, yeah, I'm sort of thinking, I'm waiting, who's going to take that sound next from some old song and pop it into some new hip hop song or something, and use that little beat and what have you, and make sense of it. No, it's kind of extraordinary what can happen, with music, and where it starts, where it ends up. And there's all kinds of, obviously right now, a lot of legal cases with people, asking who ripped off who, and who stole whose music, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's that whole, the issue of appropriation, and Led Zeppelin faced this with, riffs from Willie Dixon and so on that at the time weren't credited. And even the Beatles come together, they kind of had to settle with Chuck Berry for the lyrical section that John Lennon just kind of purloined. I don't think it was conscious. I think at that time, bands like the Stones and Pretty Things were really loving a music that had, rhythm and blues had kind of, and the blues had faded away. You go to Chess Records in the 60s, as the Rolling Stones did, and Muddy Waters was painting the studio. It was like, that's how he was making his living. He was kind of almost forgotten at that point. He was then rediscovered because all of these young oiky British bands started playing his music, and it came back to the forefront. And it's the same with that hip hop when it launched. Really, when it happened, it started probably in the 80s, let's say. I mean, it started much earlier, but you had all of those James Brown, Funky Drummer, loops, and James Brown's Yelp, and they were put on so many records. But I mean, I have to say at that time, I mean, James Brown wasn't forgotten, but he was doing Living in America. It wasn't like the classic Papa's Got a Brand New Bag and it's a man's world. That was sort of very much of a different era. And I think it reinvigorated his career. And I think everybody has influences. And, we're sort of dangerous in this culture where everybody's sort of crying appropriation all the time over everything, because you are naturally influenced by your surroundings. Fashion is like that. It's very much, if you look at the history of fashion, it's been influenced culturally, it's been influenced through different subcultures. And, there is a very strong argument for crediting where your influences come from. But I think you shouldn't not be influenced because you may be afraid that you're going to be called out as appropriating. I think that's...
That's not going to happen though, because by the time you're doing it, you're not even aware that you're doing it. I mean, how many songs have the same chord sequences? That there are
so
songs,
many, yeah.
So many. I mean, there's a finite number of kind of characters, characterizations you can kind of do, and interpretations on, as you say. I mean, I think with that kind of Led Zeppelin thing, that's just like, well, I think that's a little bit. Isn't that slightly touch of the old, dare I say it, sour grapes, and but they may well have had, instead of sitting there going, I mean, what happened to that phrase, imitation is the most sincere form of flattery?
Yeah,
let's go with that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even when you listen to the Sex Pistols, and Submission is, it's the Kinks, it's the Doors. That riff is Hello, I Love You. And they, I don't think consciously stole that, but it was definitely an influence. And knowing some of those guys, I know where some of their influences came from. Some are very blatant and others are more sort of subdued, but they wore their influences. And Oasis are a classic for that. Oasis, they took T-Rex and literally took the riff, They didn't try and hide it. They just went, whoa, T-Rex, let's do that. So there's a very strong argument for just wearing your influences on your sleeve, and Malcolm used to say that. Malcolm McLaren used to say that all the time. About plagiarism is, I mean, in the context that he was saying it was kind of like this, taking ideas from different disparate areas and mashing them together and making a kind of new thing out of it, which I think is important to do that.
It's happening all the time. It's like I think, it's quite amusing to see the kind of Philharmonic Orchestra taking on the Beatles, and blaming George Martin for because of his knowledge of classical music and putting all those arrangements in that Beatles music. This classical musician, really was. Oh, of course, everything's on and on and on. That's how the world goes around, and
it really is, yeah.
Yeah, imitation.
But you do get. But that being said, there are bands, right, which we can all sort of list, and we've actually mentioned several of them today, like whether it's Roxy Music or say T-Rex, for example, where the sound that came out of those bands seemed incredibly unique at the time, right? For whatever it is, like even if there was influences coming out of them, there was something that was just very special to that band, and really no one's ever. And they still sort of stand alone to some extent. Like no one really kind of. Maybe it's the artist's voice, or even Dylan, even just singing the way he sang, just his sound of Dylan. It was sort of a unique, That's something too.
I mean, Woody Guthrie. I mean, unashamedly, Woody Guthrie in the beginning, right? I mean, you said something, King, earlier on about you're saying to Nigel that you're quite similar in many ways, and it made me think that this is perfect. I'm going to use Nigel's favorite word, which is a segue. It's not. To me, it's a little bit like moist. It's not a very nice word, but anyway. You said earlier that you're quite similar, and I was thinking. Nigel was busy insulting me the other day on one of these podcasts. He said he thought I looked like Mugatu. I mean, you're Hansel and Mugatu. He's Derek. We could do a whole Zoolander on music, right? We could kind of do a whole Zoolander 4 or wherever we got to.
Okay.
Music.
So how's this going to work? I'm going to be smoking the weed. You're going to be doing the cocaine, and Dufty's going to be doing the ecstasy. I can see it now. We've got it all going on, people.
Go for all that. God.
So talking about, well, you talked about earlier on. You talked about how the drug culture influenced music, that often also influenced fashion and just art itself in many ways, right?
Yeah.
Is it possible to really produce successful art without various sort of influences, if you like? Alcohol and drugs. Like, who are we? Who out there from a music standpoint is a sort of super successful sober musician, for example?
I think, there are a lot of them. There are a lot of them. I think actually, getting high and getting inebriated isn't good for that creative process for most people. And I think when you speak to this major successful musicians, they all say the same thing. Maybe apart from Keith Richards and the Happy Mondays, they were the only sort of contemporary artists I can think of. I guess in the 90s there was a big sort of weed culture in 90s hip hop. But I think today it's really, artists are operating in a clean way to create. I think it's kind of a different landscape today. I know Bowie went through a big cocaine period in the 70s, and he said that he couldn't remember recording station to station at all. So there are artists that have obviously had mega influential records which they've made in a completely altered state. But I think on the whole, people operate in more of a clean way. They get more done in that way. But I think it's the fans actually that are, imbibing and kind of, enjoying the music in a receptive way within the drug culture in society.
For sure. I certainly, we've all probably seen the Doors movie and things like that, but that's they sort of the way it's portrayed in the film, at least, it's suggested that he almost like wrote the music and sung the albums through, doing various drugs at the time, and that was a big part of it. I guess certain eras of music too, and certain time periods when it was more prevalent. And also whether you are actually doing drugs or at that very moment when you're writing the track, or whether you are just doing drugs in general at that point in your life, so that it's just a part of who you are, whether you're clean or not, is the interesting thing. There's, the whole concept of clean is really something that's come up in the past decade, right? That's something which is a new phenomenon.
Yeah, but when I was a kid, I didn't really drink until I was probably about 23, 24. I went through college. I was so driven. I was so, because I kind of skipped a year and applied to St. Martin's without doing a foundation course. I kind of blagged my way in. And then I was just on this mission to get as much out of the experience as I could and to be creative whilst I was there. Because it was, the clock was always ticking. And so I kind of, I would go out a lot. I would go out to clubs all the time. But, just sort of drinking and being out of it wasn't really something that I was pursuing. It was more, the club thing was socializing and going out with my girlfriend, things like that, and hanging out. It wasn't, it was more of a networking thing really than anything else. And,
right.
But I used to go to, I don't know if you remember the Camden Palace, which used to be the old music machine. My friend Rose used to do the door. So I used to go there every Tuesday night through most of St. Martin's. And you'd see a lot of very big pop stars completely out of it in the VIP area. But they weren't recording music when they were doing that. They were kind of, Kim Wilde was going wild, as they say.
There you go.
I heard actually a fellow Doncaster. How do you call it? Doncastrian? Is it?
Doncastrian, yeah, I guess. Yeah, Donny.
Castrated.
I've got a neighbour here who is a farmer, and he's from Doncaster. And he had a birthday party, and he had Roger Daltrey singing at his party, and he did Behind Blue Eyes, and how Roger Daltrey's got to be like 70 now, right? 70 something.
70 plus, yeah.
Yeah. So and after I caught up with him afterwards, and I said on his way out, I just collared him, and I said, how can you sing that song and sound as good like literally as good, if not better than when you originally sang it, like 50 years ago.
Yeah.
And he just turned around, he had little blue glasses, and I don't drink, I don't smoke.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the big rehabilitating thing.
I don't know how much music he's written in a sober state, though.
I know. I mean, a lot of those heritage artists, when you see them, they do really deliver, though. That's the thing that you can kind of look at them and say, oh, they're past their prime and whatever. But a friend of mine used to do live sound for the Beach Boys, and I'm not a Beach Boys fan per se, but they invited me along to go to the aquarium in Brooklyn, and they were phenomenal. Their sound was phenomenal. Yeah. And, it was, I mean, not the whole band. Actually, I saw them subsequently with Brian Wilson at the Beacon Theatre. And again, they were just amazing. But they can do it because they stay in shape vocally. They don't abuse their systems and so on.
Zeppelin was saying, I don't really do social media, but I couldn't help. The only thing I kind of look at is Led Zeppelin have an Instagram thing. And somehow I saw it the other day, and I was like, oh, and I love Led Zeppelin as well. And I look at the Led Zeppelin Instagram, and it's got these little stories about how certain tunes that they created were made, like as in you've got producers who are sitting there. I was sitting in the studio with Jimmy, and we were listening over and over again. We couldn't work out how he was just fit. He couldn't get that sort of solo Stairway to Heaven, and we were sitting there, we were down about it, and suddenly the penny dropped, and it was like, all of his solos, all of Led Zeppelin's solos always happen at the end, and then there's the kind of explanation by this producer of a conversation he had with Jimmy Page about why, they let all the singing and all that stuff go on first, and then nail the solo, and it's a kind of formulaic, and you're sitting there thinking, Jesus, okay, that totally was in front of me and never saw it. It's so professional, it's just super professional. And I think if you're a kind of fucked up rock star, if you get into the recording studio and you're kind of completely wasted, your producer's sitting in there, it's a day job. He's going to try to get the best out of you, but really, come back tomorrow, try not to get so fucked up, and we'll do it again. Get them on a good day, and I do think it's not just about one guy doing it, isn't it? It's a whole collaboration, and these guys, if you've got the talents there, if they're pissed or stoned or whatever, it doesn't matter. If you're a really good producer, they can kind of catch. You can just come back and try it again, or and if you read that Led Zeppelin Instagram thing, the process by which they made their music really is just, it was extraordinary. It was like, and I've been in recording studios. And I had really good producers doing stuff, and not on your level, but it's much smaller level, but really good producers nonetheless. And good producers get the best out of good musicians, right? So, and on it goes. It's clever. It's like I was saying earlier about the drill stuff. I kind of like you change the drugs because that kind of music that my 18-year-old's listening to. It's just like you ever been in a room with a bunch of people, you sit there, roll a joint, smoke a joint. And then there's some deafening silence, and you're like, "Well, that was fun." I don't like smoking weed, but I mean, you sit there and just go, "Jesus!" I mean, seriously, home time, it's I don't know.
I think one of the big differences today is that records are quite often made at home. Everybody's got a home studio now because of Pro Tools and Logic and even GarageBand. You can get a good sound with a particular kind of music in your spare bedroom, but you can't get a Led Zeppelin sound in your spare bedroom because you can't record drums. The live guitars can't be going through a Marshall stack because your neighbors are going to go berserk. But you can write, dance music with a pair of headphones on using beats. And the artists are often not thinking about how that's going to be performed live. They're just thinking about making a great record with great beats. Zeppelin were thinking, what's this going to sound like when we're on, at the Fillmore? And they had to think about that because they were a live band from the very beginning before they started recording, as you know. And I think that's a big difference to today. The performance side of it is probably a second thought. It's actually just making a record that's going to sound good streaming or sound good in some environment, but without thinking about what happens when I get up on a stage at Madison Square Garden. How can I make this track connect with an audience, and will it?
That's interesting actually what you said, because was there a kind of period about 10 years ago when bands made their money out of recording, right? And touring was just simply just not, it was like unless you were the Rolling Stones, it's a loss-making venture. It was, it was like it didn't actually generate the income. Or maybe 20 years ago, it wasn't generating the income.
Sure.
And now it seems the tables have completely turned. Now touring is the kind of, that's where the money is. That kind of like, losing sight of the fact that, hang on a minute, we're gonna, in order to promote this thing, we're going to go on tour and like hammer it, and we're going to be able to do it. But do you think it's changed a lot now?
It's totally changed. I mean, I'll give you an example. I made a dance record in the mid 80s that gets about 35,000 streams a month, and I get 89 cents for that. Right? It's ridiculous. Yet you can go out and play a small show, with, a couple of hundred people and actually make a bit of money, sell merchandise, But if you're of the level of, I don't know, take Taylor Swift, for example, or even Sleaford Mods, who are, kind of more underground, you can still go out and Sleaford Mods play Glastonbury. I mean, for a duo, they're a pretty big act, but they sell a load of merchandise, T-shirts, tote bags, all that kind of stuff. They're supported by that probably more than record sales, and certainly more than streaming, because streaming is microcosmically small. So I think today when people are making music, it's almost a byproduct of how they're going to make a living from it. They're going to make a living through selling merchandise, if they can. It's funny because, when I started making this record a couple of years ago with a buddy of mine, Fabio Fabri, who's based in Italy. He's in Florence, and he has a studio in Florence. And I was going there a lot to work, to teach. And we met, and he said, "Oh, I've got a small studio. Do you want to come and make some music?" And we were kind of gung ho. So we were doing it for fun more than anything else, because we know the reality. You're not going to sell anything, but let's do it. It's a great fun project. And now we've got the album, we've got it released, and we're doing some press and stuff like that. The next thing is to actually get together with a band and perform it live, and that now is the big challenge. Because he's obviously in Italy. A lot of the other guys that played on it, like Midge Ure, is in London, and Dave Formula from Magazine is in Manchester. They're all over the place. So bringing everybody logistically together is pretty much impossible. So we have to find other guys to play with. But we have the logistics now of, do we do gigs in the East Coast? And Fabio comes here, and I get a bass player and a drummer and a keyboardist here, and we rehearse a few days and then go out? Or do we go to Italy, in which case I need a visa, he needs a visa to come here, I need a visa to go there to perform. So it's really complicated.
But how ironic, how unbelievably difficult it is to be a live musician and an actual talented person to get up there and perform your whatever it is you're doing, whatever you play, or do your music, perform your music. So it's unbelievably difficult. It's punitive. It's been made even more difficult in the last 6 months in this country. But at the same time, you, me, Nige, we can all click on Spotify right now, and we can listen to a tune that's been made, I don't know, some Brazilian rainforest pipe music. Yeah, I mean, seriously, properly produced, nice tune, and the person who's done it is getting like 0.5 cent for every 50,000. I mean, is it not the kind of, do we not now have a formula for basically the implosion of creativity in the music industry? I mean, how on earth is this gonna? Where's it going? I mean, where do you see it going?
It's an interesting question, and I think so. There's downsides to the whole digital thing, obviously, and the downside primarily is sales of music, but the upside is the creative collaboration part of it, which we made a record that we recorded. Fabio plays all of his guitars, produces the track in his studio in Florence. And when I'm there, I do the lyrics, do the vocals, and then we've got the basics of the track. Then we can send all the stems of that track, or the individual tracks, to Richard Fortus in the US to put down some guitar lines, or we could send them to guys in London or in other parts of the UK, or other guys in other parts of the US and other parts of New York, and we can collaborate really, really well in a very high quality way because of the digital possibilities.
But
So
Keenan,
in the one side,
Keenan, how do you put that together in your head? How do you put the music as a musician? If you don't have all the pieces, like, how do you, as a musician, as from someone like myself who's not a musician, listening to you say that, it sounds like, oh, okay, yeah, I get it. Everyone's doing their bit wherever they are.
Right.
And I know during the pandemic, there were various quite big music releases of sort of big hit songs that were coming out where the musicians had never even met ever. And they were only put together. And they literally the first time it was sort of, I guess they were even performing together was on the radio. I heard that on Sirius XM. Certain bands were performing together all virtually for the first time. Producing, and the songs were great. But how do you do that? How do you know what you're going to hit?
To the question, the thing Keenan was about to get to, and I'm really, this is going to sound super rude, but the upside of the digital thing is the ability for musicians and producers to be able to send stuff and collaborate, talk, and make that great music.
Yeah,
that's the upside of the digital thing. But the downside is, how do you monetize it? I mean, how
it is. It's really hard. I mean, I've never worked that out. That's why I don't make a living from music. For me, fashion was a more surefire way to make a living, and that's very insecure. But music, I knew when I was 20, we went into EMI Studios to record in Manchester Square. And I knew then that, making a living out of this is going to be really, really hard. But having a lifelong career in fashion, you kind of can do that. I think today, again, there's upsides and downsides. Nigel was asking a really, really good question, which I think, to answer from my perspective, I don't want to speak for other musicians, but with our most recent recording with this album, I kind of, I hate using this word because it's so cliche, but curated musicians that I knew to play on it. And basically, I would call them up and say, hey, we got these tracks. Do you fancy playing on a couple? And I would choose the track that suited a particular musician. There's a guy playing on one of our tracks. His name's David Torn, and he played on Bowie's last 3 albums, Heathen, Reality Heathen, and Next Day. And he plays a very kind of sort of ambient guitar style. He doesn't play melodies per se. I mean, they're very dissonant. I knew he was going to be brilliant on this particular track that we've written, which is called Euphoria, because it would offset the nice melody of the track. You needed a bit of counterpoint to it. And so I thought, David Torn would be brilliant. And he's somebody I didn't actually know. My next door neighbor, Mario McNulty, produced Bowie's Never Let Me Down re-recorded album in 2018, and he knows David Torn very well. And I said to Mario, would you introduce us? And Mario said, yeah, sure. So then we played David the track, and he liked the track, and he was willing to play on it. That wouldn't have been possible, definitely not 20 years ago. I mean, we just didn't have the sophistication in terms of the technology. I've never met David, Midjura I know, and, met Midge many times.
Well, but 20 years ago, you would have been doing the music. You wouldn't have been, what you're talking about, it's not so much curating, I would venture, as it's the skilled producing, right? You're producing, and you're just being, it's the sign of a skilled producer. You can hear someone's sound, and you can think, oh, I know exactly where that's going to go. And then you tease out the best sound of that thing. I mean, that's just skilled producing. Now, you do that online. It's brilliant. I mean, it's,
But what comes first? What comes first, I guess, is the question I'm asking is, for example, do you write the lyrics first, or do you get a riff in your head? And then how do you know what that next person's going to give you that's going to go along with it, that you're going to somehow mix the next piece of music to? And is it all, I mean, I guess there must be just the stages. You must be just adding on, but you can't just do it all together and then add it on at the end.
Yeah. I mean, we with this last record, we worked in very different ways. So Fabio had some songs that he'd written. I had some songs that I'd written. He had some songs that didn't have lyrics. And so I would go in and put down a lyric on a song that he already had fleshed out. Some songs that I had lyrics, completely finished, and we re-recorded them in his studio. And then it was a question of, thinking about, okay, I've got this track. It sounds, a bit kind of psychedelic. I want something to pull against that, because I don't want it to be all in one vein. I mean, what we're doing is very much of kind of retro sound, and we're not doing anything new at all. But, in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, who's a guitar player who's going to play a lead on this that's going to really pull against it and actually make it feel new, because they're playing a sound that you maybe are not expecting to hear on that type of track. And, I would think of Richard Fortus, who plays with Guns N' Roses, he has this very kind of LA rock and roll guitar style. And I thought that could be great on that track because it's completely the opposite of what the track is, and it will really jump out, So it's a bit of that. You called it production or whatever, but it's sort of having an ear for someone's style and knowing whether it's gonna gel with that track, with that song. And it's
tell us about this album then, King Boy Vandals. So first of all, the name King Boy Vandals. What is that? What does that come?
It's an anagram of Slinky Vagabond. And it was either King Boy Vandals or Sly Blonde Vagina were the two anagrams that I came up with. And so I thought King Boy Vandals was a bit rolled off the tongue a little bit better.
I don't know about
that. And it's taken a couple of years to make it. We did all the backing tracks, the vocals and everything before the pandemic. And then when the pandemic happened, that's when we brought in all the guest musicians. And, we made it, we put it out ourselves. We made a few videos. I was in LA and Palm Springs a couple of weeks ago. So we shot a couple of videos when we were there. And, it's all self-produced and self-made, and it's just our creative expression. And, Fabio's a great mate, and he's a very, very talented musician. I think he's an excellent guitarist and a brilliant producer and a pleasure to work with, a fellow Taurian. So, we're all kind of earth signs in the mix. And, we've just made something that we love, and we've started making another one now. So, we're kind of just rolling along with it.
Is it as well? I mean, obviously you alluded at the beginning that you don't really do it for making money. You do it for the love of it. Is that still the motivation? Are you able to monetize it in any shape or form other than streaming it for a few cents for every 100,000 streams, or what are we doing?
You can go out and play gigs. I mean, we were offered a gig for Dentsu advertising agency about a month ago, which unfortunately fell through. But that was to perform online, and we could do that acoustic. So we have a full acoustic set, so we could do the whole album acoustically. And, things like that are real. They're a real opportunity because it's to 1,000 odd employees of a company, and it's 6 songs. It's you get paid. It's great. I mean, I'm up for doing gigs with other bands.
But it's not the same.
It's not the same. But
it's a live venue in front of 1,000 people shouting out.
Yeah. I mean, it's when we had the first incarnation of Slinky Vagabond was myself, Clem Burke from Blondie on drums, Glenn Matlock from Sex Pistols on bass, and Earl Slick, who's Bowie's guitarist for the longest time. And our first show was at Irving Plaza in New York, supporting the New York Dolls. And I mean, I hadn't played live for a few years. I was kind of crapping myself with that one. We had to go on right before the Dolls, and everybody was there to see the Dolls. But it was fantastic. It was a fantastic thing. And the euphoria of playing live is the most important thing. So for me, doing festivals, like lower down on the bill, or supporting bands is the way to go, because the audience is already built in. I'm not interested in getting up in a bar and playing to 5 of my friends. And then the next gig is 3 of your friends, and then the next gig is your wife, and that's it. That's the reality of it is you have to be real.
What I've always done, just play to I was about to say play with myself, play to myself. So from the off, you never let yourself down then, You
never let yourself down, but it's like, I'm very much a realist. I'm always a realist with fashion. I know the paradigm and the parameters of fashion. There are limits. There are places you can go with it, and you're not necessarily going to go further than that. I think if you understand that in the beginning, you're kind of not let down, and you can work with a sense of reality. I mean, I'm a total optimist as well, so I'm totally going for it. But I do know the reality and understand the market as well, understand who's going to want what I can give, and why are they going to want it, and how many of them are there, And I think it's important, and I think it's something we all get as we kind of get more experienced in life. You understand who you're speaking to as an artist, and you kind of know that they're going to connect with what you're doing if it's working within a certain parameter. So that's really what we're trying to do. But we're just trying to have a fun time making this record with our mates. That's basically the bottom line.
Where is I mean, first of all, I guess
I'm doing this podcast actually.
Yeah, well, exactly. It's very similar to you and I. Keenan, before we let you go, we've got something called Last Orders on this show, but I'd love to know as well, the actual album available on Spotify, available, I'm assuming, Apple Music.
It's
Google
all the
Play.
Streaming, YouTube. We're getting like a lot of views. We had like 5,000 views in a week on YouTube, which was pretty good. When the first single came out, the first single's called "The Beauty in You," and it's kind of a ballad. Like, it's sort of, people tell me it sounds like early Suede, so it's definitely got a vibe. But yeah, we're making a vinyl of the album and a CD. That won't be ready until probably October. But by October we might be ready to play some shows, and that's where you can really sell it. There's not that many record shops anymore, so it's
people. Where do they go? They go to slinkyvagabond.com or keenanduffy.com or both.
You can go to slinkyvagabond.net is the website. We're on Facebook. We're on all the social media stuff, and I'm keenanduffy.com for my stuff too. And they can find all the Slinky stuff on my website. So whatever you can remember, go and check it out there.
And guys, when we actually post this particular podcast, I'm going to put all the details in our social media on at Shaken and Stirred Show. You'll be able to find it. So follow us along at Shaken and Stirred Show. All the information on Keenan Duffy and Slinky Vagabond and his new album King Boy Vandals will be there. Now, before we let you go, last orders on a man who doesn't even drink. But here we go. Quite simple, quite easy. Skinhead or long hair, Keenan?
Long hair.
Really?
Yeah.
And there's me thinking there was the punk in you, but anyway,
No, long hair. I'm a gender bender at heart.
There you go.
As you saw from that photo.
Trust me, I've got pictures that look just like that of me, FYI. So there you go. Favorite fabric to work with?
Well, favorite fabric in a tactile way probably has to be velvet, because it's so lush and plush and luxurious.
You really are. Look at you. After all that, you are a glam rocker. I can see it now, through and through. In the movie of your life, who would you have play you?
Bob Ross.
Okay, Bob Ross it is. What gets your goat and what floats your boat, Keenan?
What gets my goat is loud talkers in public places, on phones more than anything else. And, what floats my boat is a good vibe, a good atmosphere. Anything that's created with a good record, seeing great clothes, seeing great art, anything that somebody's making a personal expression and it's really honest and true and fun. And here they come. The cops are coming.
The cops are coming. They're coming to get you. Finally, they've caught up with you. I was worried that it was in my neighborhood. I'm like, oh no, I moved into the country, into the hills on purpose. I was going to hide under. Oh, Tom's gone. Look at that.
We lost him.
Wow.
There you go. That was Tom. He was being nabbed by the police. We just lost Tom there for a second. Final question: shaken or stirred, Keenan?
I think I'm stirred. I think I'm more of a stirred kind of guy.
Well, I like to think of myself as stirring as well.
Yeah.
Some of us are, some of us aren't. Tom's definitely a shaker. Keenan Duffy, everybody, on the Shaken and Stirred Show. Check out his latest album, King Boy Vandals. The songs are great, actually. I was just listening to one right before I got on with you. Again, you sent me the album when it first came out, I guess, in earlier this year, and I checked it out. But really, congratulations. Slinky Vagabond is the name of the band, and you'll be able to check it out on Shaken and Stirred Show on our Instagram. We'll have all the links there as well for you to check it out. But good luck, Keenan. I hope to see you soon and, catch up in person before long.
Absolutely. Great to see you guys. Thank you so much for inviting me on the show. Pleasure.
Best of luck. Take care, mate.
Cheers, mate. Bye.
All the best. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much for listening. That is Shaken and Stirred. We will be back next week with another podcast and another fantastic guest. And stay safe.
See ya.